Welcome to the Voices of Australia podcast, hosted by me, Anthea Hancocks, and Lydia Tesema, where the concept and reality of social cohesion is deeply explored. This podcast is brought to you by the Scanlon Research Institute.
Each fortnight, we bring to you interesting guests who present a new and often unexplained perspective of Australia. We acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from which we are recording this podcast, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and in the spirit of reconciliation, we pay our respects to all First Nations people.
Joining us for our first episode is Dr Hass Dellal. He's the chairperson and executive director of the Australian Multicultural Foundation. Hass has over 25 years of service to multicultural organisations, the arts and the community promoting multicultural Australia. In 1997, he received the Medal of the Order of Australia for his service to multicultural organisations, the arts and the community, as well as the Centenary of Federation Medal in 2003. In 2015, he was awarded Officer of the Order of Australia for his distinguished service to the multicultural community and the advancement of inclusiveness and social harmony, as well as to youth and the broadcast media. Dr Dellal was born in Melbourne to Turkish Cypriot parents. He lived in Turkey with his family between the ages of 10 and 13, after which they returned to Australia. Welcome, Hass. Hass, given this is our first episode and we're actually focusing in on social cohesion, we really wondered, what does social cohesion mean to you and how do you see it actually playing out around you?
Thanks, Anthea. Firstly, I wish to acknowledge the traditional owners. We are actually conducting this podcast on and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. A very good question, Anthea, after I sort of reflect back, I guess in the 35 years I've been with the foundation and working in this field of promoting diversity and ensuring that everyone is able to contribute to Australia's social, economic and cultural well-being by, the means that we can provide, whether it be through the work we do or working with others like the Scanlon Foundation and many other organisations that I've worked with for the last 35 years, government, federal, state, local. And it's certainly an area that there's much been written about social cohesion and certainly came on the radar. And I must say, with the work of the Scanlon Foundation, we were sort of referring to try and describe cohesiveness in one way, whether it was through multiculturalism, whether it was through, other terms that we were trying to grapple with. But ultimately what we're trying to say is that how do we live together as a diverse community? And I think with the work from starting with, I guess, with the Scanlon Foundation's Mapping Social Cohesion, that gave it some meaning and I guess there's been much written about social cohesion from a theoretical perspective, and there's been numerous definitions on how to define it, and I guess I agree. That the theoretical approaches play an important role in shaping public policy, and in the research and measurement of cohesion in societies, but I think it's really the practical realities of what that means of social cohesion, namely what social cohesion means when it is experienced by an individual within neighbourhoods and communities is what it really means for me and the impact of that. So it's really about that shared vision, which includes, those universal values we talk about and mutual respect and common aspirations. A community that is well functioning, where they do share goals and responsibilities, and where they are, I guess, ready to cooperate with other members of society. The process of achieving harmony, or that social harmony, and not simply a program or based on policy outcomes, but those concepts of real belonging and shared values and participation and a sense of connectedness that are central to this understanding understanding of what social cohesion may be, or the abstract concepts, and more on how these concepts are translated into reality, and specifically how belonging and participations are shared, and those values are experienced. So we're really talking about people and community, and it's their lived experience, and how do you measure that in terms of as a practice, but also I guess it how do you actually also identify the challenges? Because I think the way you strengthen social cohesion is sometimes through the challenges, and because they become the issues that you need to work with and develop social policy or community connectors around in terms of moving forward. So I guess it's very broad, and for me, it's really strategically how you plan for the needs of your communities, and then how do you actually, in a way, monitor, evaluate, and learn from those shared outcomes in order to move forward. And this requires a partnership. It's not just community. It's got to be with government and non-government and corporates. Everybody needs to work together in sort of maintaining this, and so that, we as a society are able to work towards a well-being of all members,
Yeah, has your family's experience is interesting, though. I'm thinking that I completely understand all the things that you've said around the different components on a macro level. What about on a micro level? How would your father have thought what would he have interpreted as social cohesion, given his experience in coming to Australia and then choosing what your life would be like?
Yeah, a simple word, really. It's a sense of belonging and being able to participate. That was simple as that. That's why I'm saying, we've got to go beyond the theoretical perspectives of this and talk about the reality and what it's meant for each person through each generation. And my father's generation, it was right, that sense of belonging, being able to, let's say, he wanted to go to university and become a vet in Australia. That's he had that vision when he came over from Cyprus in 1948 to be a veterinarian, and that didn't happen. So he then wanted further opportunities to work, and that was provided. Even in 48, he was able to go out. Although, look, admittedly, he was able to speak the language because he came from Cyprus under the Commonwealth. But he grew up in a school where they taught English, so he could speak English. So it was very important for him to be able to communicate. But what he did realise was that, if you had the ability to communicate, doors would open for you. And that was one of the first things that he realised, that it was so important to be able to engage in order to achieve what you wanted to do. And that's why I guess I say I'm a great supporter of language learning in a country. And some people sometimes say it's just not just language learning, but we saw it at the early migrants. We see it now, how important it is to be able to have at least a skill to communicate in order to explain what you want. So that you can open those doors. And I saw that with my father. And I think, for him, it was that being able to communicate, the ability to communicate and have that sense of belonging so he can participate and achieve his aspirations in life for him and his family.
That's really interesting, because earlier you mentioned how one way to understand or look at social cohesion is by looking at or identifying the challenges. And when you said that, and I kind of considered how one of the challenges for people might be that if you look at Australia, we've had a history of constantly integrating new people into our society. And so from that perspective, we're always having to work on social cohesion, and we're always having to adjust. I think that point about communication is really important, because as I reflect on my experience in this country as a young African Australian woman, I have at times been able to identify where I felt limited or where I haven't felt as welcomed, but at the same time, I was equipped with such strong language skills and the ability to communicate that I actually saw how I was able to overcome certain environments as a result. So I think that makes a lot of sense to me in my lens, how communication can be your weapon, in a world that is constantly having to sort of adjust and shift. And admittedly, it can't be an easy task to, achieve social cohesion in a society that's constantly changing and welcoming new things. But I wonder what more, if we take the first step of, learning how to communicate and we seek opportunities, surely, again, you've got to interact now with the system and they've got to meet you in the middle. What would some of those challenges be, or what sort of things does the system have to overcome in order to meet us in the middle?
Well, that's an interesting question that you raised, because I think for any society, and I've been thinking about this in terms of, what do you need within for a system or a government or a community in terms of preserving cohesion, or simply because, as you point out, it's so diverse in so many ways, not just in what it means, but in terms of moving forward. It's always something that's ongoing. You can't sit back and say we've achieved, cohesion in our society, because there are always so many elements. And given Australia's unique diversity, which is continually growing in so many ways, it requires those systems and those changes. And I reckon, first of all, you need a strong government leadership and direction. I think that's so important. Two, I think engaged and accountable government decisions around social policy and the public sector. It is important. I think supporting a workforce that is diverse and having a workforce that is culturally competent. So understanding cultural competency within a diverse workforce. Diversity in education, I think it's paramount to empower and to provide knowledge, informed knowledge to your students around, diversity and the society that you are living within, and having conversations on inclusion at government and community levels. Open, difficult conversations, and to improve trust flows. Governments are used to making decisions on behalf of communities.
Yes.
Governments are not used to having genuine partnerships with communities where they can also make those decisions. It's easier for government to make decisions on behalf of community on the guise of consultation, but it's not real consultation.
This has been a sort of commentary that's been around for the last few weeks or so, which is that now is a time when we can actually engage in conversations. This is the time we should be having conversations about a whole variety of things, from climate change to the treatment of women, to a whole variety of different things. You've been the chair of SBS, you're the chair of the Australian Multicultural Council, but you started as a teacher. So what is there about your journey that helps us to understand how we can have these types of conversations with communities? How do we actually engage how do we allow those people in leadership positions to feel comfortable having these types of conversations with the community? What does it look like?
Well, I think it's really difficult, I guess, because we have developed certain structures and systems where, yes, we do allow for consultation with communities, but I guess the challenge is for governments to let go of some of their power so that communities can actually genuinely be heard about the issues that concern them, and that they are part of the co-design of a problem or part of a solution. They are genuinely part of the co-design. And I think I became aware of this many, many years ago when I remember we would, the Commonwealth government was developing programs around countering violent extremism. So what they did was threw a lot of money out into the community, thinking that communities would jump at this money and that they would sort of develop partnerships. But what it was the government's agenda. So what the government thought that, yes, communities play an important prevention role, but how do you engage with communities so that they can genuinely play an important prevention role? And what are the skills and tools and resources you provide community in order that they become effective, and not just throw money at them thinking that they're going to be some sort of, a community group that's going to develop a whole range of projects to fit in what you think is right. That's not a genuine partnership. You need to consult with community and really look at the problem and say, and if you really believe that community plays an important role in prevention, and they can be, 50% useful in developing prevention strategies, you then need to let go some of those powers and those misconceptions and ideas that you may have, or what you think is right, in order to have that genuine partnership. And I think it applies for social cohesion and policy development as well. And I think it became very evident with the, Housing Commission lockdowns here during the pandemic, where suddenly there was a lockdown for whatever reason. I'm not going to go into that. There was lots of issues around there. But I think the key thing is that when you weren't able to manage the consequences of that lockdown, you ran to the community to help you. You did not engage with them in the beginning to avoid the problem that was created later on. And I think that was probably one of the biggest lessons. We throw money at community like no tomorrow, grants and so forth. Now, if you have, you are genuinely giving that money so that communities can develop their services, then you should have enough trust in them when it really matters to confide in them on issues, because they do have the information, the resources, and the know-how to deal with it before it becomes a problem. So what had happened, they locked down those housing commissions, as I said, for whatever reason they had to. But at the end of the day, in order to get things working in there, they had to go back to the community, because the community knew who was living in what sector of those flats. They knew how the food delivery, they had the latest data, they had the latest information, they knew how to communicate, they had the language knowledge, all of that. That is what I call a genuine resource. But if you don't engage them at the beginning, then it's pointless.
Yeah, this makes me wonder.
That has a huge effect on a cohesive society, because you're saying, I don't trust you.
Yes.
I know better how to manage you.
This makes me wonder on, as well as one of the reasons being that, perhaps government don't want to let go of some power, as well as that, I wonder if there is a hesitation to interact with cultural communities by government bodies because of a lack of knowledge or comfort or confidence in actually interacting. Because I actually met recently an amazing cultural consultant who delivers, keynote speeches and does workshops for, say, staff at Monash. And she's learnt through that process that a lot of the reason that, say, two parties don't interact is just because they don't know how to interact. And in an effort to avoid uncomfortable interaction, they actually just stay away from it altogether. I wonder if, the lack of cultural competency that you were talking about, is that perhaps one of the reasons why the system hesitates to interact with us, the cultural communities?
All right. Good point, but how long do we use that argument?
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, yeah, and that's why it's not so much an argument in this case.
No, but as an excuse.
You're right.
How long do we use that excuse?
Right.
I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about government and others saying, we have invested millions and millions in cultural competency, in train the trainers, in all sorts of tools and products within government. They spend their entire life consulting so they can develop resources for their staff. And I can name you, I've seen so many over the 35 years. I mean, I've just finished one for Morris Blackburn, but they've been committed for the last 10 years and we've been developing their cultural competence programs year over year. You know what? They continually change it. They are moving with the time. Yeah. It's a commitment. It's a commitment and dedication for the future, improving for the new set of solicitors that are coming in. It's not a one-off thing. Now, governments and others have been really good at, suddenly ringing up consultants and others. We need to do a cultural competency course and we've got this. It might sit there for 3 or 4 years. How do we know what that passes on to the next employer or employee or the news section? How is it updated? Is it updated? Is it current? What is the status of this? So for me, for a country that talks about being the best country in the world in terms of diversity and multiculturalism and all that, this should be second nature to us. We shouldn't even have to worry about this stuff. It should just happen. I get more cultural competence in some other European countries in government departments than I do here at times.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what social cohesion is like in practice, or some of these activities in practice. And I was just thinking, Hass, that your whole family and yourself have been incredibly committed to the community, to ensuring that we all learn the various components that we need to put in place in order to make people have that sense of belonging. Are there any examples where you've seen it work really well?
Another good question. All the hard questions from you two guys. Look, I guess there's been some great examples that I have seen, and it's really been at the community level. I've seen instances where in an educational environment, in a schooling environment, where there was a particular school that was having some real difficulty with the students and the composition of those students, right? And there was this one principal, I won't go into names and that, but there was this one principal, and she had some great foresight. The first thing she wanted to do is, she realized that the school was diverse in so many ways that she took the step of stepping out of her school and going into the community, into community groups and organizations and families and homes to really understand, those challenges within the community. Got the stories, got the narratives, firsthand, the lived experiences of people. And then what she did was match those lived experiences with other families, particularly those young students' families who, and this is really difficult to do, who were, I guess, giving those newer members of their community a hard time from students. But she went beyond that. She took it to the families. She introduced the families to each other. Mm-hmm. So the families got to understand each other. And in turn, the families then became the educators to their children, who are the kids who are actually, because rather than blaming the child and saying, you're abusive or you're discriminating, it comes from somewhere. Mm-hmm. She felt it actually came from somewhere, and that was that the entire community didn't understand this new community that had just settled in her community. So she engaged the communities together. So there were social barbecues, parents meeting parents and all that sort of stuff. And she built trust. She built confidence and a sense of security. And what that meant was the families, the kids whose families were, being abusive, as I said, or racially discriminating, there was a change because the families they felt they were a bit more informed about those communities. They were no longer a threat. So they broke down the fear of the unknown, those barriers, the fear of the unknown. So that engagement sort of developed a sense of, I guess, a better sense of belonging for the new arrivals in that community, but a better understanding. It took away the fears from the general populace in that small community itself. And I thought that was a wonderful thing. It wasn't a thing where she would put the students together in the school and just kept it there. She realized it was beyond the school, and if you want to make a permanent change, you had to go beyond, because she saw the parents as the educators, not just the teachers. And I thought that was a really strategic and a very visionary approach. And I'm talking about 15, 20 years ago here. And I thought, wow, that was really good. And well done to her in that sense. So that was, for me, a changing moment for me.
It is amazing how pivotal teachers and principals are within the community itself.
Yeah, if they take that, if they're brave enough to go outside of their environment a little bit, that school environment, and look at their school as the entire community. It plays such an important role, not educating only the children. And the other thing was in the same area, same school, in the primary level, and I don't know if it was a direct effect of this, but I'll never forget, I was standing in a street corner and there was a father and there was a young daughter just picking her up from the primary school, and this family of Vietnamese went by, and he saw something and he swore at them. And the young girl tagged on her father's hand and said, "That's not nice, Daddy. You shouldn't be saying things like that about these people."
Yeah.
Now, that was from that school. Now, I thought, whether it was a consequence of the ethos and the value of that school, that was a lesson learned from this previous experience, this principal sort of initiated, I'm not sure. But I thought, boy, if a 5-year-old, or 6, 7-year-old little girl recognizes that was wrong, to me, that's...
Yes. It makes me think
that's
about...
social cohesion.
Yeah.
That's living cohesion. That's what that's all about.
It seems as if social cohesion is also, a part of it is us not checking each other, but holding each other accountable in like direct or indirect ways, and passing something on, or ushering people into an environment and making them feel comfortable. Why is it important to talk about social cohesion in Australia? I think we sort of have touched on one reason. I mean, for one, Australia is always changing, and we've always got to sort of be conscious of social cohesion. I think that's actually one thing I'm thinking about now, is how it would help if we were just conscious of the term social cohesion, what it means. And I think just being conscious of it would help us contribute to it a little bit more.
Or maybe just what some of the particular aspects are that we personally can make a contribution to.
Yes, yeah.
Look, I think membership to a society is so important, and if we can just allow people to become members, then that will remove a lot of antagonism and anxiety within people, because we tend to create our own perceptions and stereotypes, whether it's based on media or social media, but even before that, when we didn't have, rampant social media and people weren't so involved with media, we still created stereotypes and perceptions. It's like when I was growing up as a child, I mean, straddling dual cultures is always a challenge for any young person for any migrant child. One, you need to have the sense of, you want to feel that you belong to a group of people, whether it's in the the local shopping centre or in the school or in the communities that you live in, or in your workplace or whatever, and you want to be accepted. And then you've got this pressure at home about not losing your culture and your values, and you're not like them. We're not like them. It takes two. We always talk about the receiving country, but what about the people who come here as well? They need to integrate as well. They need to understand that it's important for social cohesion. It's not one way, it's two ways, and you need to.
So, Hass, what was the impact of spending those few years when you were an early teenager going back to Turkey?
It was huge because, as I said, I was born here, but at the age of 8 or 9, my father decided that he'd take the family back to Turkey, which was a big step. And he, because he felt that, we were losing our culture and language as well. And he was a great believer that, your culture and your language is an asset to any society. And if you lose it, you become a mishmash of nothing. You become nothing. You just here and there. So he didn't want us to understand our Australianness, but he also did not want us to lose our language and culture from our heritage. So he took us back. But he forgot one thing: the fact that we couldn't speak Turkish, and the second thing that we were leaving from Australia. So I'll never forget when I first went to school there. And the other thing he forgot was that Australia and Turkey were enemies in my days. I mean, because of Gallipoli, right? Yes. I mean, it's not the camaraderie you have here today. No. Okay. So that was established after 1968 when Turkish migration really happened. And my family played a very important role in the Turkish migration, but also changing those perceptions when we came back. As a leader, he was. But anyway, getting back to Turkey, I'll never forget the first day I went to school there, and I arrived there, hardly no Turkish, just English, and my parents had the foresight to enroll me in a school where they actually taught English. So there was English and Turkish, so that helped. And I remember these young Turkish students coming up to me and asking where I was from, and I said, from Australia. And they looked at me really strange because they couldn't work out. And I quickly said, but I'm Turkish descent. You know, as a qualifier, I felt I had to do this. I don't know why. I felt danger. So I quickly said, and Turkish, Australian Turkish descent. And they couldn't understand, you know, this is 1962 I'm talking about. Why, you know, there are no Turks in Australia. Why would you be there? We fought with them. They're enemies. So the first thing they said to me was that, you're the enemy. You're really an Australian and you killed my uncle in Gallipoli, right? So they didn't accept me. So, you know, and I'll never forget they actually on the third or fourth week there, they invented a game in my honour and they called it Gallipoli. And basically what it meant was I was on, in every playtime, recess time, I was on one end of the schoolyard and they were on the other, about 10 of them, and they'd go, charge. It was a war game called Gallipoli. So they attacked me and hit, you know, so there'd be always fights. Of course, the results were never in my favour. I always lost. But there was this one young Canadian,
to be fair.
Outnumbered, but there was this one young Canadian boy, and he was about my age, and he was also from the Commonwealth, but he was similar, Canadian of Turkish descent. So I said, you stay on my side. He said, why? I said, you're part of the Commonwealth, you stay on my side. He never knew what I was talking about. But anyway, but I had to resolve that problem. Because it couldn't work that way. So what I did was, I remember I had all these pictures of these kangaroos and little things and statues and so forth. So I brought it to school one day and everyone gathered around me and wanted to know what this was. So I made up all this rubbish story about these golf bears sitting on gum trees and they'd actually never breathed air and they got their air through eating gum leaves. They couldn't believe that. It was rubbish. I had a kangaroo, jumped in their pouch and went to school with a kangaroo. They loved the story. But it broke down the barriers and I was able to tell them my story and my history, that I was a Cypriot Turk. My parents came. I was born in Australia. So after a while, they became real, you know, friends. And we used to go out marching in the street, throwing rocks at the American Army windows together, you know. So that's what we did. We had a common enemy in those days. So that's what we did.
So this gives you an incredible personal insight into the experiences of people, new arrivals into Australia, and some of the conflicts that they have to negotiate on a day-to-day, hour-by-hour basis.
Not everyone engages that level of creative problem solving.
Well, that's it, and the language ability and all the rest of it. But then 5 years later, we came back here, right? And when I was going to school, I grew up out of Broadmeadows in those early days, and Maryland's High School out of Reservoir, Broadmeadows. Sitting, I think, Form 3 or whatever it was, Form 2, Form 1, Form 2, I can't remember in those days. Anyway, sitting in the classroom, every Anzac Day, the ABC used to run a commemoration of Anzac Day. And every time they talked about Johnny Turk, every eyeball would go into my room. This time I was a Turk, not an Australian, coming back here. Again, fights at recess time. Being attacked and all the rest of it. Finally, I decided, and I think I suddenly realised from the Turkish experience, what I learned from there was something that was so important to me, that I had to accept who I was and not let others determine who I was. So basically I said, I'm an Australian of Turkish descent, and that's who I am. And since from that day, I never let anyone determine who I was.
Wow.
And I think that's otherwise I just would have had to conform to everything everyone wanted.
I relate to
just
that.
to be accepted.
Such courage.
And I think it's really important for young people to understand we live in a country now where diversity is by and large accepted, regardless, right? I mean, yes, we do have our challenges and newer communities do have their challenges, but you've got to stand up and say, this is who I am. And the Australianness is important. That's why I say it takes two. You just can't come to this country and just, forget that. You are an Australian of a particular culture or descent or a faith. And we accept that. We work very hard to accept that. If you start dissolving that or sort of playing around with that, then we do have a mishmash of a society. It's so important to make sure who we are and be clear about that, because this country says to us, we give you the rights to your religion, your faith, your culture, right? That they're there. The three dimensions are so important. And yes, there are responsibilities and obligations, and that's about, reciprocal respect, abiding by the law, commitment to Australia first and foremost. It's not a big ask. When you have all these other elements.
I agree, and I relate to that from my experience and from my identity as an African Australian, as an Australian woman with Ethiopian descent. I found that it was much more beneficial for me to actually embrace both sides as two whole things that I'm embracing, so the duality in my identity, rather than trying to, like you say, mishmash that. And honestly speaking, as I continue to reflect as well on social cohesion, it's almost as if, being in this cohesive society, it's like, it's a shock absorber. It's like all of these things like racism and, the things that I do experience still being an African Australian woman, microaggressions, being having a strong sense of belonging in, say, educational spaces, workspaces. It really does act as a shock absorber for the racist experiences, for the microaggressions. And that's why I do encourage young people who have these experiences to, find that sense of belonging in pockets of the society, which, come under these big umbrellas of education and work and family and community. And once you find yourself solid there, I think a lot of other things tend to get better as well.
There is something really wonderful about referring to of Ethiopian descent or of Cypriot descent or Turkish descent, only because it helps people to actually get to grips with the range of diversity, that I'm not putting you into a bucket of Africans.
Right.
I'm actually recognizing that you have a very specific component of that diversity that you're bringing, and it's an incredibly valuable thing to do.
And it's such a rich component to help this country move forward. We've got to work towards the well-being of all its members, and we've got to fight against exclusion and marginalisation and create that sense of belonging. And if you're not convinced who you are, right, and stand up for who you are and believe in who you are, then you are actually adding to that marginalisation in a way, because you don't know how the other person will respond to you. You're not giving a clear sign. You're not giving a clear direction. So you're letting that person determine who you are.
Yes. So as we come to near the end of the podcast, I wondered if you could possibly share a little bit about your thoughts about what are some of the things you'd like to see happen over the next few years? What are some of the things that we could actually start doing and putting in place?
Look, for me, I think, Anthea, I guess it's funny. I mean, people say to me, we've had so many issues that have come out of the pandemic. One way, yes. I think the cracks were already there before the pandemic on a lot of social issues. I think they just got wider. And for me, it really is coming back to that whole concept or that whole idea, notion of improving trust flows between government and community. Well, so policymakers and government. I really would like to see a genuine effort in collaboration and co-design on issues. I really would, because I think I saw what was achieved during the pandemic, where community actually initiated projects. They actually, and government relied on them, relied on them.
Yeah.
And it was almost like saying, yes, we give you these resources of money because we think you're a genuine partner. We don't give you these resources of money because we want your vote or because you're a welfare, this notion of welfare. Right. It's more than that. Once you are out there as an active member of society, whether it's an individual or within the community, there is so much scope. And what that also does is that it shows to the wider community, boy, migration does work. Look how effective communities can be. They are actually developing solutions to problems, and it's a whole. People see that as an inclusive way of working together.
And we're talking about
sharing that responsibility.
Yeah, and common issues. We're talking about
common
issues that run across the board.
So if the Somali community went out and or the Turkish community and promoted vaccines or influenza vaccines or good hygiene, it helped the entire community, not just the Somali community.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
And that only happens with co-design and a sense of ownership and responsibility and respect for the community in a real way. And that's what I'd like to see.
Well, there you have it, co-design for cohesion.
Absolutely. And I do think this sense of trust, the trust that's been built and the trust that we've got as that sense of goodwill within society.
Yeah.
I think that's going to come up over and over again.
Yes.
Absolutely, Anthea. And I would just hope we don't lose what we developed, what we learned over this pandemic period, because we did learn a great deal.
Yes.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hass. It's been an absolute delight to have this conversation with you, and to kick off our podcast with a conversation with you is just an extraordinary opportunity. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. I hope it was worthwhile. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
I enjoyed it anyway.
So much.
Thanks very much, Hass.
Right.
Thanks,
Bye.
See you later.
This podcast was brought to you by the Scanlon Foundation Research Institute. This podcast is produced by Faisal Farah with sound design and mixing by John Bigelow. Original music is by Official Steno. You can find all our publications on our website at scanloninstitute.org.au. Please subscribe to be the first to receive our next fortnightly edition.